Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ummah in Exile. Today we are going to be talking about a very important subject that is directly impacting us as Muslimin far and wide. And that is the topic of Syria. As we know from the hadith, this is the authentic hadith from Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed barakah in Sham, Bilad ash-Sham, which is essentially modern day Syria. And as a Muslim and as a follower of Islam, we need to be very vigilant about what is occurring in the world, whether it be geopolitics, economics. And we also need to be very attentive about what is happening to our ummah as a whole, because in another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whatever afflicts the ummah, it's kind of like the ummah is a body, right? So if one part of the body is not functioning, do you think the whole body is going to be able to function? Probably not.
If one part hurts, the whole body hurts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I myself am Suri, but we have a more important and special guest with us, who is also Suri. So please, if you'd like to go and give kind of like a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, and why is this topic about Syria so important to you, and just the discussion of Islam in general.
Yeah, so my name is Abdullah Tarabishi. I graduated with a degree in political science, and then I went and taught English in Turkey for 2 years, and I worked in refugee advocacy there as well. And then when I came back to the United States, I started my Master's of Public Policy, which I have just finished, alhamdulillah.
From University of Michigan.
University of Michigan, Ford School of Public Policy. Yeah. I think for me in particular, like going to Turkey was for me the eye-opening thing of like this really built my connection to Syria. I mean, I was Syrian. We used to go in the summers when I was a kid, but like it was a little bit of an abstract thing. And then subhanAllah, I made so many friends who were Syrian refugees in Turkey, who were had just had that experience, and just seeing what they went through and seeing the experience that they were having in Turkey, the difficulties that they were having with the racism in Turkey. It really made me built my connection to like the situation in Syria, and I was ever after that, I guess. Yeah. Since then, I've been following it very closely.
Yeah, so Abdullah and I have been pretty good friends for over 5 years now. Same thing with you. Like we know him pretty well. I know personally. I was telling you earlier, we have a chat called Syria News Analysis, where we just talk about what happened in Syria after December. And we've been just analyzing situations developing. But I remember ever since the days of college, we'd always just talk about politics and things like that. So there's no better guest to analyze this situation. I really trust and value Abdullah's opinion, even though we disagree a lot of times.
We disagree a lot,
of things.
But the disagreements are the
those are valid.
Yeah, and they're very, like, it's like intellectual jousting, like I like it. So I hope there's some of those today, actually, For sure. I know, when you opened up, you spoke a little bit about Syria and about why we should care as Muslims, right? To me, beyond just the state of, like, the spiritual state of the Ummah, it's the world, the way that the world views us, I believe, is in a very interconnected fashion. Like, if you have the label Muslim on you, geopolitically, you kind of fall within the aspirations that countries have towards Muslims, regardless of where you live, right? Especially if you're in the Arab world, by the way. And on top of that, I think Muslims do really need to concentrate united efforts behind the success of any Muslim country, whether it's Syria. Obviously, we bleed, our hearts bleed for what happens in Palestine, the genocide to this day. And beyond that, we have the Uyghur crisis in China. We have the Kashmir crisis in Kashmir, right, under Indian occupation, very similar to what's happening in Gaza. And our hearts were bleeding for Syria for over 14 years, So I want to kind of have you run us through some of the background of the conflict, the pre-freedom, I guess.
Pre-December 8th.
Yeah, pre-December 8th.
I mean, it's difficult to know where to start, actually, because I think that we usually start this type of history in 2011, right?
Right.
Because of the revolution beginning in 2011. But I think that just to lay the general groundwork of Syria, Syria is a country where when it got independence from the French in 1946, its military was a military that had been constructed by the French to control the country. So it was a military that was directed inward, essentially. Mm-hmm. And if you're the French, you want to control the country. So what do? You put minorities in the military to control the majority. And so the military was majority minority, essentially. And it was a military that was, again, directed inward toward controlling the country.
So it's more like a police force.
More like a police force. And so what happens is in 1947 or 1948, Israel declares its independence, and of course all the Arab countries go to war. And this military, by this point, so they got independence in 46. First Syrian president basically goes in and purges the military. Tries to. He's terrified of a military coup, and the result is that Syria is not ready for the 48 war.
Right.
And the result is that they lose that war badly. Not just Syria, lots of other countries, but Syria also. And the result is that there's a military coup anyway. And then Syria, there was back and forth or whatever. But the interesting thing is Syria has never quite shaken until recently. Obviously, Syria had never quite shaken the position of having essentially a military that was a police state military. You had the Ba'ath Party, of course, coming to power in 1963, and I think that for the first time post-independence, and of course, so then you've got the revolution in 2011, but that wasn't the first uprising, because we know in Hama in 1980 or 82 there was the uprising in Hama, and I think that it's interesting to look at Syria from that standpoint of institutions that were built to control the country and that were used by various leaders to control the country up until basically past December.
Do you think secularism played a role? Because I know, throughout the Muslim world, not just the Arab world, I'm Albanian, same thing happened in Albania. Turkey had a very similar model where the military was built as a bastion of secularism that was meant to contain Islamic ideological resistance, right? Do you think that played a role, throughout Syria, definitely, and the Arab world at large?
For sure, yeah. I mean, you've got the 1982 uprising was primarily a Muslim Brotherhood uprising in Hama. And just in general, I think that there was a sense, especially amongst more secular Arab nationalists, that the greatest threat to them was Islamism. It wasn't the West. It wasn't really Israel, although they, despite what they might have claimed, it was Arab nationalism, or it was Islamism. Yeah. Islamism. And so, I definitely think that there was that, and I think they to an extent they actually kind of fed off each other, because I think that the best avenue to resist these types of dictatorships was Islam, right. And so you had populations that became more overtly politically religious. There was a more overt religious political identity, I think, and I think that definitely played a major role for sure.
Yeah. So
I don't know. What do you guys like? What do you guys think about that interaction of secularism and Islamism in the region?
I don't know where it really sprung from necessarily. I don't know who put the idea. I understand that obviously when I visited Turkey, they are infatuated with Ataturk. They have statues.
It's like an idol.
Yeah, his on the bills. If you say anything negative about Ataturk, then you're essentially done for.
There's blasphemy laws against him.
I wish I'd known that before I had done some things. But certainly there's this huge infatuation with. For some reason, the modern man trying to separate religion from essentially just lifestyle in general. But I don't know. I really don't know even where it came from.
I think following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and following the collapse of the Caliphate as a system, I think Muslims kind of adopted a defeatist mindset towards the West. The Caliphate was a 1400-year-old tradition. That doesn't mean that a Khalifa was always powerful and we know that during the Abbasid time, for example, the Khalifa was like a figurehead. Even by the end of the Ottoman Empire, the Khalifa was a figurehead. Following the Young Turk Revolution, the power was with the triumvirate, right, and with the Young Turks. But I think just the psychology of having this it's like destroying the Christian Pope, basically, the Catholic Pope. The psychology of seeing your caliph taken out of power. Yeah. A lot of Muslims internalize the defeat. And I think, I mean, I don't know what I would have done in that time, but I think there was genuinely this sentiment that, are we wrong, right? Is there a better way to do things? Is their way the way of the West, like the secular way, right? Is their way the better way to build systems than ours, right? And at that time it was a genuine question because there had been a high level of intellectual stagnation in the Muslim world, realistically, right? So I think that kind of permeated into societies at large. Definitely, Western colonial powers helped propagate the idea, in my opinion, that, religion is a backward system and, this post-Enlightenment thinking, essentially. And I think that definitely had a big impact in the Arab nationalists and the Baathists, and that kind of took over. Like, our grandfathers probably were not too religious as people. All of our grandfathers.
Probably because they were persecuted for practicing it, though.
Right.
And I feel like that, like, just to speak from like personal experiences, from what I've, like, stories that I've heard from like family members, people who went to the masjid in Syria during the Assad family's regime, people used to take down names. Like, they would just be a guy standing at the door, not to protect the people, literally just to write down the names. Oh, this guy comes way too frequently. Let's go and take him in the night. And then never to be seen again or heard it from again. Just disappeared. And then, like, for 13 years, maybe this guy will come back, but this person is completely, like, deranged. They're shell-shocked because now they're being tortured every single day. For what? For praying. You're talking about going to Salat al-Jum'ah. So essentially, like, these, like, people instilled a level of, like, not just fear, not just like, hatred for the Islamic system of like, hey guys, look, the West is here or the French is here. We're doing so much better. Our economies are so much more powerful than your countries. But then they also instilled on top of it the fear, you don't want to join us 21st century men? You want to stay in your Bedouin tents? You want to stay with this old traditional values? Okay, fine. Go to prison. So it's like a tough decision for the populace at that point to, do I kind of just like declare a new identity for myself? Do I completely change who I am to now fit into this new model citizen, right? Or do I go against the mold, right? Do I move away from this country entirely, which a lot of Syrians ended up doing, whether by force or by, choice. The ability to do so, right? And so it just seems interesting now that following this thought process, subhanAllah, that, Islam maybe is not this system that'll work politically or economically. Following this thought process, right, we see the state that Syria is in now. Only when Syria transitioned back to this Islamic thought, if you want my honest opinion, did they begin to have some semblance of hope, and they actually gained their freedom, as we saw through HTS on December 8th. In my opinion, again, it's because the will of the people became more structured towards what they were used to, which is Islam. I don't know, what do you guys think? Was it like maybe was Islam the motivating factor that really pushed the revolution to be as successful as it was? Or maybe did Islam not have as big of a role as I think it did in the success of the revolution as a whole? What do you guys think?
Well, I do think, I think it's one of the ironies, or one of the funny, kind of sick, sadly funny things about the situation of the revolution was that I think all the armed group, the vast majority of the armed groups were motivated by Islam. They were motivated by Islam. Islam was an identity, and more than that was a moral framework and a way of life for them. And they were fighting for that identity and way of life. And so when you had Western countries like the United States looking for quote unquote moderate rebels to support, for them moderate rebels basically meant rebels with no moral ideological commitments. It meant rebels who you could tell what to do and they would do it. And by and large that ended up being people who were not very good people. People
with no moral compass.
Yeah, with no moral compass whatsoever. Because you end up you end up sponsoring essentially the opportunists. You end up sponsoring people who will do whatever. Power hungry people. And so absolutely, I think in Syria, and then there was an attempt to suppress or at least downplay that perception. I think both by the West, who wanted to support some rebels, and they were trying to downplay the level of Islamic identity. So there's like I don't know if you guys have seen the clip of John McCain, for example, defending rebels on the Senate floor. And to be fair to John McCain, I actually respected him for saying this. And they had, I think, launched a rocket, and they said Allahu Akbar when it hit, and he was basically saying this isn't like extremism. They're just saying thank God.
God is great.
Yeah.
It's like Marjorie. It's like the equivalent of Marjorie Taylor Greene, but less.
On Palestine today, right?
Exactly. With her $500 million amendment or something.
What a twist!
Failed.
No, I think I agree with you. I think the overwhelming majority of I think, look, this idea of like secularizing society worked better in some countries than in others. Mm-hmm. In a country like Syria, where Islam was so deeply embedded into the national, even pre-national identity, just a popular identity. Because when we say national, it's like, what is a Syrian, right? Someone who lives within the borders of Syria. There's Syrians who have more in common with Sunni Lebanese than they do with like Druze, for example, you know?
Well, not only that, but Syria itself, the province, so Damascus was the capital of an Ottoman province, right? But that Ottoman province encompassed Beirut, it encompassed Jerusalem, it encompassed Damascus, encompassed Homs, Hama, but it didn't include Halab, it didn't include like Deir ez-Zor, for example. And so it's actually interesting when you think about Syria as a concept. Really, and sadly, of course, the situation we're in now, Damascus really is a city that is a part of a region that includes Beirut and includes Jerusalem.
The Bilad ash-Sham, right? This is actually the greater like Sham area. And there's parts in Syria that historically have not been part of that area, actually. Per the old definition of what Bilad ash-Sham was, you know?
Well, and it's sad that those borders went up. Even, I mean, obviously the Israel situation is different, but even like the border with Lebanon, I mean, it's because like there was a lot of hardship. Like there were families that were like or like clans that were straddled that border. There was a lot of business that was done between Beirut and Damascus, between Jerusalem and Damascus. Like, I
mean, it's the fracturing of an entire social structure.
For sure, yeah.
You know, I think this is intentional. Colonial borders are drawn in a way to keep people from being empowered and from having any sort of organizational structure together and collective identity at that too, right? So yeah, it's like, imagine like breaking a family into multiple rooms and never letting them see each other. It's very destructive. It's very destructive to the fabric, to the identity, everything. And I think all of that kind of played into Syria, Lebanon, all these countries, right? Definitely. So it's hard to secularize a society that has that kind of deeply embedded Islamic tradition. And it worked only to an extent before it backfired, right? On top of that, the secularization didn't come softly. It's not like you had the benevolent dictator who took you to the greatest heights your nation had ever seen. These were, police state maniacs who basically privatized the country for their own family, conducted business on behalf of their family, built really unjust systems on top of that. I think Islam played a role for sure. I also think the discontent with just, hey, we're not getting any value out of these guys, also played a role. Just the worldly discontent that, okay, forget about your ideology, what are you doing for me? Like, is my pocket fuller? Are my kids more educated? Am I more comfortable? And the answer to all those questions in Syria by 2011 was no. You know? On top of that, you have all these tribal dynamics that take place, and all you needed was that spark in Dara, and everything went off. You know? So then what followed is, I think, the more tragic part, which is the balkanization of the country, you know? I think one of the things that really shocks me when I talk to Syria today, especially the critics of the post-revolution or post-December 8th, Syria is going to become like Libya. I raise the brow, Syria was like Libya. Just because you see a map and it looks all united, I was like, what are you talking about? There's 4 different administrations in the country. You know, there's the Kurds, there's the semi-independent tribes, there's the Tanf US zone, there's the Idlib, HTS zone, there's the Turkish zone. That's worse than Libya. You know, it didn't become like Libya. It was already worse than Libya. It was already balkanized. One thing that a lot of people I think fail to understand is, why did it go that way? For example, why didn't the US build or pledge a unified support for rebels, right? Why didn't they try to unify rebel groups? Why, or Turkey, or whoever else? Why didn't that effort take place? What do you think?
Well, I think, as I said, I don't think that the United States, I think the United States wanted somebody who would do their dirty work in the region, basically. And they couldn't find somebody. So their goal by around 2014-ish was rather than, or around 2013, 2014, was they never wanted the rebels to win. What they wanted was a negotiated handoff of power from Assad to somebody else that they could live with in the region, presumably another strongman, most likely. And of course, that never happened. That was never going to happen. And so I think the Obama administration kind of strung the Syrian rebels along, kept promising aid and never delivered it. And ironically, I've always said that it would have probably been better for Syria if the United States at the beginning had either fully backed the rebels and let them win, or had said we don't want to do anything here.
We're not getting involved.
We're not going to get involved. The way that they kind of strung them along and kept promising aid and kept kind of dripping, drip. I think really discredited the United States in Syria, and really discredited those rebel groups who were willing to take American aid, or at least asking for American aid, or who were saying maybe we should downplay some of those religious elements so that we can accept and get Western support, Western aid. Those guys all got largely discredited, and the groups that ended up getting support were the groups that basically were uncompromising on these types of issues, ironically.
So what role did groups like ISIS play, right? What role did groups like ISIS play? These essentially ultra militant, quote unquote jihadi groups,
Khawarij.
right? Yeah, I would use more of that term Islamically. Yeah, definitely. But the West referred to them as the jihadis. So what role do you think ISIS had in this entire thing?
What do you mean? What do I think?
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what ISIS really was. And even nowadays, for example, you see the new president of Syria being constantly, people constantly keep claiming he's ISIS.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think they understand that there was a Game of Thrones happening, and there was dynamics happening within the rebel groups themselves, of which ISIS was a part of initially, right?
Kind of a part, but they were never really. This is the one thing that I think if you look at the dynamics of the revolution, or the war, depending on the term that you want to use, if you look at the dynamics, I don't think that you could ever really claim that ISIS was part of the rebels, because the rebels ended up fighting ISIS just as much as they were fighting Assad. And arguably, I think ISIS was fighting the rebels more than it was fighting Assad.
Yeah.
I think ISIS was in it for themselves. It was out for it, entirely for themselves, essentially.
Wasn't Abu Bakr Baghdadi, wasn't he Mossad?
There's rumors.
Wasn't that WikiLeaks documents?
Yeah, I don't think anybody.
They never fully confirmed it.
It's not verified. There's definitely a track record of him having history already. So he's a real person. It's not like he just popped up out of nowhere. It is a kind of a conspiracy thing. I still believe Israel definitely had a role in propping up ISIS. I think the West had a role in propping up ISIS.
I think Israel's whole, and this kind of we're getting to recent events. I think Israel's whole role in the region has always been. I think if you were to put different countries or different interests along kind of a spectrum, right? You have a spectrum of countries that want stability in the Middle East, not even out of any sense of any moral sense, but just they want stability for their own interests, and countries that want chaos in the Middle East. And I think that Israel is definitely on the side of the people that want chaos in the Middle East, because Israel can largely control their borders, and so they don't. If Syria blows up, we don't care, and we keep Syria weak, we keep Syria divided, and it's good for them. And so I think ISIS was a perfect power for that.
Perfect tool.
Perfect tool for that. Perfect tool to dismember and just create chaos in the region. And so I don't know if there's evidence that they were of Israeli origin, but for sure the Israelis were happy with ISIS existing. And the other thing is ISIS also drew the attention of the West. And so when you draw the attention of the West, and they launched some attacks in the West, of course. And so the West, Israel, of course, wants the West involved in the region, because their nightmare scenario is that the West essentially withdraws its support from Israel, withdraws its interest, realizes, as I think they're beginning to, that we don't actually have any interests in the Middle East. We don't have any core interests in the Middle East, and actually that Israel's kind of just dead weight essentially. Why are we supporting this this genocidal state?
I think that shift is beginning to happen too.
But I think to that point, I think that's why ISIS definitely worked within their plans for sure.
Well, they never attacked Israel, and the one time that they did, they literally publicly apologized. They were like, "Hey, we are very sorry about this. It will never happen again." It never happened again. So the one has to go and think like,
what's going on? Right?
If you guys really are like supposedly the most like Islamic jihadi, again, like in my opinion, Khawarij, because they are extremists, for sure. Right?
Yeah.
And why aren't you fighting the number one biggest enemy in that region? But I think that it just kind of speaks volumes to the manipulation of Islam, though, because again, in my own opinion, based off the question that I asked you guys, I think that Islam was the main kind of
drive.
It was like the catalyst that set everything off. Like if there was not Islam, I don't think that the revolution would have been as successful. If you want my opinion.
1,000%. I mean, like HTS and all that is proof of that. These guys are Islamists. Like you can't deny it. You know?
So like where do they fall? Where does like HTS fall on like the spectrum of like what one would consider a quote unquote Islamist? Because again, I don't think that we do these definitions justice. Like, you know, as a Muslim growing up, jihad was just thrown out there as this umbrella term, right? But in reality, if you look into Islam, you had jihad fi nafs, right? Jihad fi sabilillah. Like there are different forms of jihad, right? Nobody really explains that in the media. They just kind of give you like, they throw out these terms. So like, what is it? Where do they lie, I guess, in the scale?
Well, they've evolved quite a bit, actually. So they around 2012, 2013, when they first emerged, they were I think it's safe to say they were pretty extreme.
I mean, they were an offshoot of
explain that, but what do you guys mean by extreme?
So there's a
5 times. I got called extreme for paying 5 times a day.
So for example, let me give you an example. Let me give you an example by contrasting it with what they do now, right? So at some point when they were controlling Idlib, they shifted to allowing imams from all four madhahib to speak. They shifted to allowing imams from different theological schools to teach. Before that, people who are more strict will tend to
isolate within their school.
Yeah, they'll tend to say they'll say, for example, Ash'ari are not allowed to teach. Ash'ari essentially are not allowed to teach. Maturidis are not allowed to teach. That we don't allow the Shafi'i madhab. We allow the essentially like a Salafi approach.
Dawah,
exactly. So there's in Syria, I think historically has tended to have a pretty strong like Sufi approach to Islam.
It's a big Sufi center.
Very big Sufi.
Turkey's right there. So
and I think that people within the like more Salafi sphere will be very much opposed to that, and they'll try to push back very much on that type of approach to Islam. And so, for example, you had a couple of instances in Idlib where HTS, the government at the time, tried to replace some more Sufi-leaning imams with people who were like more ideologically of their own, and people in the local neighborhoods objected, and they said, this guy's been our imam for a long time. We don't want him replaced, and so they basically apologized and they replaced. They backed off essentially, and then this shift toward increasing pragmatism and increasing inclusivity, and by the time of like 2020, actually earlier than 2020, they had actually imams from all four madahib on their fiqh council itself, and so that's kind of what we mean by they became more
flexible leadership, basically, not as stern ideologically or within the Islamic camp. Right? Yeah, a lot more flexible leadership, a lot more inclusive. Sure. You know, that's this is what I was saying earlier. I think that's what a lot of people misunderstand, is that these are evolving, dynamical, not just situations, but groups, people, terms. Everything is dynamic. Everything is constantly changing.
This needs emphasis, but
right, and they have their own Game of Thrones playing. They have their own interests, their own situations that are coming into play that us, from our own cushiony Western perspectives, just simply cannot understand. You know, you go and talk to a Syrian on the ground, they'll give you a very different reality of what these groups did and how they operated and who they supported and why, from how we analyze it here, just like a strictly inhumane, basically, geopolitical analysis, like a cold geopolitical analysis without the human element, you know? And I think that's why a lot of people still nowadays like, oh, Al-Qaeda is running Syria. No, it's not. Like, no, it's not. Ideologically, these people are not Al-Qaeda. These are not, Salafi jihadi extremists anymore. Like he said, there was an evolution that happened. There was people that came, there was new people that joined, there was fresh blood, there was new leadership. It's not a stagnant situation. It's not by any means.
Well, and not only that, but I always make this point when people say that, Al-Qaeda is running Syria, and I say that, well, first of all, they broke from Al-Qaeda in 2015, right. And then not only did they break publicly, you could say, okay, they just broke rhetorically publicly, whatever, okay, yeah, okay. But then what happened is they ended up, when they broke from Al-Qaeda, they actually had a splinter group, a number of their fighters broke off and said, we don't want to be a part of you anymore if you're going to do this. And then they ended up having to fight these people, and they ended up having to fight Daesh, ISIS as well.
Mm-hmm. So this is what people don't know.
So they evolved ideologically, but almost more importantly, they paid for that evolution with blood.
Yeah.
And so they've spent years and years fighting for that ideological evolution. And so when you see somebody claim to have changed, yeah, that's one thing to say that they've changed, but it's another thing when they've been fighting on behalf for that change, and they've really been living that on the ground, and in the way that they've been governing Idlib, for example. And this is the other thing that I always used to say to people, like after December 8th, they would say, we don't know, we don't have any idea how they're going to govern. They might be going and cutting off people's heads, and I would say, actually, you do have an idea of how they're going to govern because they've governed Idlib for several years, exactly. And we can see how they've governed Idlib, and it's not. It's not New York City for sure, and an American who were to be like, I would talk to some of my classmates at the Ford School, and I would say, like, if you were to be dropped into Idlib, you probably, you might be a little bit, it's definitely more conservative than you would want, but we know how they've governed, and they've governed in a largely inclusive, I say inclusive from a religious standpoint, in a reasonable sense, and we're going to see what they, and I would tell them at the time, we're going to see what they do. But, the idea that this is just a government that's coming out of nowhere is not true. Like, we saw how they govern.
There's a track record.
Yeah, they have a track record for several years. Yeah.
SubhanAllah. I think one thing is that this ego bubble that everybody lives in, whether it be on like social media or just in their own personal lives, has really driven that divide personally. Like a Karen in America cannot see themselves visiting Syria because of what they see on the news. Like they refuse to be as objective as possible. They just kind of feed them. It's very like a sheepish kind of society almost, and not just in America, but I feel like around the world due to our connectedness. And so the ego bubble that people kind of wrap themselves in, it feeds into this idea of like, okay, they hear Al-Qaeda once, then they're running with it. Like, if they hear Daesh or ISIS once, and they're like, oh, okay, then they must be affiliated,
thinking,
right?
Yeah.
And it's, I think it has to do with the responsibility and of like an individual kind of doing their own research, as well as just like laziness in general, in terms of people educating themselves on this situation. Of course, it's really tough. Like, why are we up to date about Syria? I'm a Syrian, right? Yeah. A lot of my family was directly impacted by the harb, whether it be in Hama originally, or the Syrian civil war that took place, or even like Hatta right now. A lot of my family members were killed. So of course I'm going to be up to date about the politics of Syria. But and then if you want to go and expand it, I'm also a Muslim. I stay up to date about these things. I stay up to date about Palestine, about the Uyghurs, about Syria, about everything that's happening in Turkey. Why? Because I think it's my responsibility as a Muslim man, if we want to actually start implementing some type of change in the world, okay, then we have to go and start somewhere. We have to go and start with caring, right? Yeah. We have to start by looking into these things. Because we see it all the time. Misinformation spreads like wildfire.
Especially on Syria.
It's all clickbaits nowadays, right?
Well, and I think... Sorry.
No, please, please. No.
I was just going to say, I think with the advent of AI, by the way, I think it's gotten to the point where it used to be the case that, like, for example, if you opened up a video... let's say you watch a video about Syria, and you look at the comments. It gives you a sense of maybe what some viewers are thinking. And I think it's gotten to the point with the AI generated comments and the number of bots that are being used that I think that the social media discourse and the comments I think has just been so incredibly like brigaded, but that looking at comments, looking at, for example, Twitter threads, looking at social media in general tells you more about what types of powers or what types of
playing.
Who are the interests, who are the people who can marshal these types of bots,
right?
And what do they want you to think?
You see that on the Iranian side a lot.
Yes, yeah.
So Iran is the main pusher of propaganda against Syria to this day.
They're really joining up with Israeli Druze.
Yeah, so this is I say this. I say this all the time to people. Syria is the one place where Iran, the axis of resistance,
Israel,
Kurds, Druze, Israel are Assadists. They're all working together against the Sunni majority.
100%.
That's the one place where all of them are like, this is the enemy.
They're all working in Syria, and I would say that I think that two of the countries with the largest bot networks are Israel and Iran. And both of them have an interest in destabilizing Syria. It's very scary. That whenever something happens, you see just incredible mobilization of these types of disinformation all across the internet.
And then India follows that, and they're also on
so it becomes a huge mess. Yeah. I do want to stop on this point a little bit because I think there's, especially among Muslims, there's like a binary thinking about these things, and especially like, Iran is a good guy on Palestine, they must be the good guy in Syria, right?
Yeah.
And they don't realize that there's a really set of complex interests in the Middle East. America has their own interest. Russia has their own interest. Iran is a power that has their own interest, right? But I think the one thing that these guys have collectively agreed upon is a strong Sunni population, which is like 80% of the region, is a threat to all of us, right? So if let's say Iran is ideologically in favor of Palestine, which they very well probably are.
Yeah.
But the way that they perceive it is that this has to come from a Shia revolutionary lens. Like that has to be the dominant player in the region, right? The West has its own interest, Israel, Turkey even, right? They all have geostrategic interests that kind of play against each other, but sometimes on each other. And this is like sometimes you have to analyze it so carefully because you might end up actually supporting the oppressor indirectly, Iran is the perfect, Palestine is weaponized all the time. Just because something, Hamas itself has a very complex relationship with Iran. They've been in support of the Syrian revolution previously. Yes, they had relationships with the Assad government out of pragmatic need. But at the same time, Hamas did not condemn the Syrian revolution, right?
I mean, even within Hamas, there was a split over what
exactly.
Yeah.
So my entire point is that these are complex human dynamics. Sure. You should not see them in like a black and white, Iran good guy here also. No, not necessarily. I think the Muslim just needs to look at things from the lens of oppression. Who is being oppressed right now? That's whose side you take.
I think you have to be careful, a little bit careful. I see what you're saying, but I do think you have to be a little bit careful about sort of just. I think there's a lens, especially in like Western activist circles, that essentially the side that's being oppressed is or the side that's not even being oppressed per se, but the side that's weaker is the good side. And I think that sort of dynamic, people, for example, in Syria, who are not following Syria very closely, they hear about a Syrian government and then they hear about a minority, and it's like, there must be they must be people who are being oppressed. So I see what you're saying.
No, I think that's the key.
I would modify that a little bit.
That like oppression doesn't mean minority. Yeah. Minority doesn't mean oppressed. Yeah. Right? As we see, you mentioned this earlier. The French literally built a minority government to lead over the majority. So a lot of times these are tactics of weaponizing minorities to institute an agenda and control.
It's funny though. It's the majority of the time, at least from what I've seen, when the minority comes into power, they are the ones who are the people oppressing.
Yeah, the most. There's something psychological about it because they, truth be told, regionally, minorities have faced certain difficulties. So they've built like a victim mindset. Essentially, it's the same way politics operates here in the United States. The victim mindset keeps you in a perpetual state of paranoia.
Well, and I would also add that the West uses these minorities when they're convenient, and then essentially throws them away when they're not convenient. Right. And that I think is one reason why there's a large number of minorities in Syria who recognize that. And like, for example, you see the Druze. Most of the Druze leadership is not on board with being used as Israel's tool, because first of all, they recognize that Israel's not actually an ally. But second of all, they recognize that being even perceived as Israel's tool is incredibly dangerous for
in an 80% Sunni Arab population.
And you saw the same thing with the Kurds in Iraq, where the United States essentially used them against Saddam when it was convenient, and then let them get massacred when it wasn't convenient for them. And so I think that I mean, I think there's an increased recognition in the Middle East, in particular, by minorities.
It's the saying is, it's bad to be enemy of the United States. It's worse to be a friend. Yeah. You know, just because they operate from such a cold, like realpolitik.
Yeah.
You know, but I think that kind of brings us to where things currently stand, right? You know, we had that quick sweep that kind of overtook Syria in December 8th, where we thought, oh, maybe limit. I kept up with it from day one. Like I'm very plugged into the Syrian news. I was like, whoa.
You were monitoring the situation.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, like this is crazy. They're launching an attack on villages. I was like, oh, they're in Aleppo. You know, it's like, oh, and I was like, oh, they're probably going to carve out a state in Aleppo. Oh, they're in Hama. You know, it's like, oh.
And the minute they hit Hama, by the way, as a Hamwi, I already knew, okay, all the people of Hama, just give them a gun. They'll badly march to Sham.
So, but even then I was like, okay, they're going to do something. Like Assad is going to do something. Iran is going to do something. Russia is going to do something. Oh, they're in Homs. Oh, Damascus has fallen. It was so quick. It's so crazy. It, like, subhanallah, this idea of like the Nasr coming very quick on the oppressor, you know? Like the Allah says in the Quran, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that when He gives the oppressor respite, but when He destroys him, it's a quick destruction, you know? And I think that to witness that is like a boost of iman at that time, you know? Regardless of who HTS is, whatever may end up happening. But to see that unfold was just like insane to me.
Remarkable.
Yeah. I want to ask you guys a very. I already know you guys' answers, okay? But I'm going to be that guy because we have to go and ask this question. Would Syria be better if Assad was still in power?
Syria was not good to begin with Assad in power.
Thank you, bro. No. Thank you.
Yeah, I mentioned Libya earlier.
No, but this goes back to the whole like Iran thing, right? Everybody, like all of these pro-Pali people are starting to complain, oh, Syria was helping the Palestinian movement, and now that it's liberated, it's not helping it.
But it really wasn't.
It wasn't helping.
One person's liberation does not necessarily mean another person's enslavement.
Right.
And in fact, I believe that when dude, honestly, the 14-year civil war, I did not see it happening. That I did not think that Assad was ever going to lose.
The
fact that happened in less than a week.
Yeah.
That they
10 days, I think it was.
Yeah.
Before.
12 like
days or something. You know?
Something like that. Well, a little bit longer than a week.
Sorry to be pinned.
No, you're fine. But I would rather be accurate than mistaken. The fact that it happened in such a short time frame, relative to the long stretch that the revolution itself was, that itself was like mind blowing. But it gave me hope, not just as a Suri, but as a Muslim, as the main factor. I was like, oh my God, as a Muslim, holy crap, this is amazing. My second thought was like, I could finally go home. I could go to Syria. You don't think that a Palestinian wants to have that same exact thing for their people? No, 100% they do. And as a Suri, I think above all else, as a Muslim, I want that for Palestine.
Yeah.
And that's what they need to go and start realizing. You know, it's not just, okay, just because Iran supports Palestine, we got to go and jump ship and join Iran. No, we have to be as objective as possible, right? Why do people insist on being as objective as possible when it comes down to talking about HTS or how well Syria is going to do when setting up their government, but they can't give any respite for the process that goes through with making a government work.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, especially a heavily dysfunctional country that is in ruins has been under sanctions.
Civil war, exactly.
Right? Civil war. It's state building, nation building is not easy. And get back to the question, I think. By the way, Syria was not helping the Palestinians. You know, they were not. Assad was an opportunist. He wasn't an ideologue. Assad aligned himself with Iran and Russia because it was an opportunist thing to do.
Kept him in power.
Right? They kept him in power. They clearly propped up a paper tiger because his army was useless. So the Iranians and the Shia militias and Russia were doing all the work for him, clearly. But it's very clearly reported that Assad still had contact with Israel. His intelligence services were in constant communication with Israeli intelligence services. There was coordination on attacks and strikes and stuff. He refused to open up the Syrian front to Iranians or even the Houthis multiple times. There's a track record of Assad not giving a damn about Palestine. It was more of a trope that he used to rally like a nationalist sentiment more than anything. I don't know what you have to say about that.
No, I definitely think that's true. I don't think. I mean, Hafez al-Assad and then his son kept the border quiet for 40 years. Like they didn't do anything. I wanted to go back to your point though about the fact that it took about 12 days for the liberation to happen, because I think I took a very, very strong like personal lesson from that, because having like been in Turkey and like worked on that issue and sort of thought about it, and just in general working in policy, I think oftentimes you look at situations and you say essentially that this situation is hopeless, that we fought this civil war this revolution for 14 years, and you know, like it's hopeless now, and you sort of look at the situation and you just, it's very discouraging. And I think that there's a saying, and I forget who said it, but it's like if you give me like 10 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend like the first 9 hours sharpening my axe. I think that in those, it wasn't that it just happened in 12 days. What happened was that the Syrian people built the ability to organize. Because what happens is when you live under a dictator, there's not a civil society. There's not an ability of people to organize with each other, build institutions, build like civil organizations, build things like the White Helmets. There was no opportunity to do things like that, and so we didn't really have the capacity to govern ourselves. And I think you kind of saw that early on, where there was a lot of infighting between the groups, and then. SubhanAllah, I think over the course of those years, you had Syrians work together to build powerful institutions, work together to govern Idlib, to govern the areas that you had some of the most remarkable local councils that were set up by people who were just like, essentially, there's no authority here. Let's set up an authority. Let's see what we can do for our communities. And then you had a lot of Syrians also who went abroad and got educated abroad. And for example, learned languages from all around the world, and then came back to staff of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, SubhanAllah. And so the idea that I mean, it did happen suddenly. It did happen in 12 days, but we were building that, building the power, building the capacity for that then to happen in those 12 days. And I think for me personally, on a personal level, I think that sort of taught me the lesson that like you can't always control things. You can't always. You do what you can, and then you wait for an opportunity. And sometimes the opportunity comes, and sometimes it doesn't come. But you know that you did what you could. You built what you could. You built the capacity, and then SubhanAllah, the opportunity came, and they took it, and the rest is history.
I think this is the cause of qadr.
By the way, SubhanAllah, you mentioned hopelessness. SubhanAllah, our first episode, Reggie touched upon that, like how it essentially is like, as a Muslim, you should not feel hopeless. Right? It's you need to have hope that things will get better, right? Whether they do or they don't, the hope should still be there.
The idea that you think the best of your Lord.
Exactly.
You think the best of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think the saying we used was, don't say those who say the people are ruined are the most ruined among them. It's a very psychological hadith, this, that like, the psychology of a people begins at the individual level. So the individual does have to have hope, in a way, for change to come, The moment the individual resigns to this like defeatist mindset, then the society will be defeated as well. But I think, alhamdulillah, I think nobody who has 2 cents of a brain is upset that Assad is gone, And it's perfectly fine to be concerned about the future of the country, right? Yeah. I personally don't think it's an Islamic concept to normalize oppression because you're worried of the future. That's not how Islam works. Islam comes to liberate, right? And with every prophet went through a period of uncertainty when they liberated their society. Yeah. It's very prophetic to be in this no man's land for a time period and have hope that Allah will deliver you. This is called prophetic optimism, by the way. Every prophet goes through this period of taking a society that's probably relatively stable but oppressive, challenging it, going through periods of harshness and difficulty, and then the finish line, the delivery, right? So, do we know what Syria's ultimate fate is going to be? No, that's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we can have this sense of prophetic optimism towards Syria, that Assad is gone, and that's a beautiful thing. It's great that he's gone. Let's pray for the success of the country going future. So now I want to get to Ahmed al-Shara, right? Formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the group, the main group.
And now Syria's president, of course.
And now the president of Syria, right? And this was the group that was primarily responsible for governing Idlib, even though it's not the only group.
Yeah.
There was a coalition, a council of different groups that came together to do so, with him at the head. But this was primarily the main drive behind the December 8 events and the toppling of the regime, ultimately. Number one, who is Ahmed al-Shara? Who was relatively mysterious up until like 2016 or something, you know? Number two, why Ahmed al-Shara, right? Why did the West decide to kind of, so far, because again, being America's friend is tricky. Right. Why have they decided to put their trust behind him right now? You know? Mm-hmm. What do you guys think?
Please.
I mean, it's a tough question because I don't think you can, I do think that one of the things that I think is really important to see in the region in general is that quite a few Western countries, above all else, want stability in Syria. Not because, again, not out of any necessarily any not because they want what's the best interest of the people, but because Syria being destabilized has been incredibly destabilizing to Europe. I mean, you had in 2015 very large refugee flows into Europe that led to a number of far right people winning elections. I don't want to draw direct causation between refugees and far right, but I think it's
a fair link to.
I think it's and then you had an incredible destabilization in Turkey. And you just had destabilization across the region, and so I think you had the drug trade also that was flowing out of, the Captagon trade that was flowing out of Syria,
which is now taken over by the Druze al-Hijri.
Yeah. But I think I think it's important to recognize that there are a number of countries in the West who above all else wanted stability in Syria, and that was one of the reasons why, by the way, they were normalizing. They were trying to normalize with al-Assad because al-Assad was the person governing Syria, and they were basically trying to make the best of a terrible situation. I think you can kind of give them the benefit of the doubt on that. And I think that when al-Shara emerged essentially as a guy who was trying to stabilize Syria and trying to govern Syria, they decided to back him. And so, to me, that's the most obvious explanation of why they decided.
Using Occam's razor, the simplest explanation.
Yeah, and I think there are multiple motivations at play here, but I think that in particular for Europe. And the other thing is, by the way, that Turkey is also backing Ahmed al-Shara. And so when Turkey backs him, Europe right now needs Turkey to play ball because they need Turkey's military. Turkey has the strongest military, the largest army on the European continent, aside from Russia and Ukraine, who are fighting a war. And Europe is rapidly trying to mobilize right now. And Europe is kind of afraid of the United States withdrawing or not backing them. And so I think that right now that Europe needs Turkey to play ball. Turkey has a very strong interest in Syria. And we can talk about Turkey a little bit more. But just in general, I think that, to me, that's the easiest explanation.
I don't disagree with that. I think you're right. There was that PBS interview he did.
The 2019.
Yeah, something like that, right? You and I often take very differing approaches when it comes to the way that these things work. I believe that there was an effort by the West to cultivate that group or that figure beforehand. I'm not saying that what they did wasn't organic, right? It was a popular will, the collapse of the regime, all that. It did happen organic. The Syrian people did have agency over their own fate, right? But I do think that the West did through Turkey, because Turkey was kind of the one who put the red line for Assad and Iran and Russia in the Idlib area, and they said, this is our zone of interest, and you are not going beyond this. So Turkey kind of did give space to Ahmed al-Shara and HTS and this council of rebel groups at that time to form the governorate of Idlib separately, right? But at the same time, the West did find a figure in him, maybe through the help of the Turks, who they could potentially see as an ally in the future. And I do think they did cultivate his image. I think they cultivated his image, and they cultivated an alliance that came before December 8th.
Oh, for sure, in
my opinion.
They were clearly working. Yeah. I think that, to be fair, though, and I've made this point before in our group chats and things, I think that if you want to say that it's wrong to work with the West under any circumstances, then we all living in the West are hypocrites, because we're living in the West, we're benefiting from. And so I think clearly Ahmed al-Shara was working with the West was there were connections. They were in contact, and I think that's fairly clear. And I think that he recognized, and I think they recognized that their interests were not directly opposed. That their interests were. I don't want to say exactly parallel, but their interests were close enough, were aligned enough that I think that they felt that they could work together.
Some working room.
And I think the other thing is that if you're the United States, or if you're any intelligence for that matter, you want to work with whoever's in power. You want to work with everybody. I mean, you might publicly say we don't negotiate with terrorists or whatever, but behind the scenes you're going to be talking.
We saw with the Taliban.
Yeah.
It's,
they even used Al-Qaeda. They utilized jihadism during their fight against the Soviets.
Correct. In the 80s, right? Yeah.
They armed them, trained them. The CIA itself directly trained like 500 plus Al-Qaeda members. Trained up.
I mean, back in the 80s, the idea of a mujahid was like a hero in America. There's a Rambo.
Literally propaganda.
There's a Rambo movie. Rambo, like the popular Sylvester Stallone.
I haven't seen it though, but
it's like a war movie. OP guy who just guns everyone down, basically. But at the end credits of one movie, this says, "In honor of the brave mujahideen fighting communism in Afghanistan." So at that time, Ronald Reagan had them in the White House. At that time, a mujahid, like this Islamic resistance fighter, was a hero. Then it pivoted, to a villain. And now maybe there's a sanitization happening again. Who knows?
Well, and I think to an extent, the issue really with those goes back to the point I was making about the Syrian rebels is that the United States, or really any foreign power, they can't trust somebody with an independent moral compass, essentially.
Right.
Because if you're our ally, but you've got such a strong sense of morality or whatever, then one second you're gonna be on our side, but the next second you're gonna be against us. Right. And there was a recognition, I think, from the West that we should probably stop arming and supporting groups that. Ideologically, that have their own ideology, essentially, I think is the basic issue.
I don't know.
I think Ahmed Shara was, I remember reading a post on Twitter that he is he might be an Islamic figure just before the Mahdi.
Al-Hashimi. This is what we've discussed a lot of times.
Now, whether or not I believe this is, I don't know.
Jury's still out.
Because I've kind of like have to do my own due diligence on the subject, right? But I would say that anybody who brings optimism to a region that has suffered so much is actually like a decent. That's something that we need, right? We just like the Syrian people. They need optimism. They need hope, right? And you hit on this like very beautifully, where it's like, okay, if you think that aligning yourself with Western values or just the West in general is against Islamic values, then us living in the West is hypocrisy in and of itself. And I think that's so beautiful because we even look at the Prophet ﷺ, the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, when he moved to Medina, was he just met with open arms and every single person in Medina converted to Islam? No. There's a huge part of the population that were Jewish, and they maintained a lot of their Jewish traditional values. Did the Prophet ﷺ not create a treaty with these people? No, he created and established a treaty. It's a historical document that is still preserved to this day. Right, that essentially grants rights to these people, right? As an independent, essentially like while being part of Medina, they're still like maintain their independence, correct?
The autonomy. I would phrase it more like
autonomy. I think is very important. I think that's a better term. So the Prophet ﷺ had made treaties with technically non-Muslimin, right? Why are we somewhat better than the Prophet ﷺ, astaghfirullah, to not make treaties with individuals who, at the time, they might actually benefit us. Maybe in the future it might not be to our benefit, but we have yet to go and see that, right? And if you contrast additionally what Syria was going through, Russia was helping throw barrel bombs. I remember seeing the videos. They had ran out of actual rockets to use, that they legit just started throwing barrels out of helicopters and out of planes on the civilian population just to blow them up. So when Russia now steps out of the picture, So Syria can align itself with Russia, but can't align itself with America in this transition. Is that what people are trying to go and say? In my opinion, no. I think that we need to go and align ourselves with whoever is going to give us the most opportunity and the most hope. And that's what the Syrian people need. You know, again, like, I feel like these extremists want to jump out of the fray, or they kind of come out of the bushes. Again, especially like these pro-Palestinian people who've never talked about Palestine before October 7th, right? They kind of just jump ship. Now they're jumping ship on the Syria conversation, like, oh yeah, no, Iran should maintain power in this area.
Yeah.
I think for the first time, Syria has, in a very long time, I should say, for the first time in a very long time, Syria has an individual who can actually say that they are Sunni, right? Has a history in the region, and who actually brings a stabilizing force with him. When was the last time Saudi Arabia ever visited Syria? When has an American diplomat ever visited Syria last?
Right.
Very long time. When have economic sanctions been lifted from Syria? Just now. Why? Because Ahmed al-Shara, the president of Syria, was willing to come to the bargaining table, was willing to listen to what the opposition had to go and say, and came back to his people and said, hey guys, we have a deal on the table. What would you like me to do? Is he a dictator that simply says, yeah, I'm just going to sign on the dotted line and not have any discussion? No, and I think that that's a sign of hope, because, again, for the first time we have, maybe he's not necessarily democratically elected at the moment, but there's a democratic process that's going and that's being followed, and that's being, again, constantly evolved, that I think that we need to go and step back and maybe give Ahmed Shara a little bit more time. Right?
That reminds me, I heard something recently. I was talking to my brother about this, and he was basically, one of the points that he was making was that one of the problems with the Muslim community, one of the problems with our community in general, is that we don't trust each other. And so, for example, the people, if you want to be successful in politics, you have to be somewhat pragmatic. You have to be willing to work with.
You have to be flexible.
You have to be somewhat flexible. You have to be willing to work with people who are frankly very unpleasant. Sometimes even horrible people. Politics doesn't work without a certain level of pragmatism. And one of the problems, I think, with the Muslim community is we have a lack of trust in members of our community. So, for example, you look at Ahmed al-Shara and you see that he's talking to the Americans. You hear rumors of like back channel negotiations with the Israelis, and you say, oh, he's selling us out. He must be
His Mossad.
Yeah, he must be an evil guy. And you come out, and it's like it's just such a very much like a lack of.
It's a reductionist way of looking at the situation.
Reductionist, but also I think it's a very much a lack of trust. It's like it's su'ul dhan, basically.
There's no husn al-dhan.
Yeah, you're looking at your brother and you're assuming the worst of him. When
Can you guys translate that? Husn al-dhan for in case the viewers.
Husn al-dhan means essentially thinking the best of your brother.
Yeah, giving benefit of the doubt.
Giving the benefit of the doubt to your brother.
Benefit of the doubt. Husn al-dhan.
Yeah.
So it's like, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you, and I think people do view Syria, for some reason, out of everything else, every other conflict, is the one place that's so scrutinized, but in such a reductionist way, in such a black and white way. I keep saying, why is Ahmed Shara fighting Israel? Are you I hear that question, I immediately think this person, the evolution process has not hit them yet, because it's like, what are you talking about? This is a country with no military. This is a country with no infrastructure. This is a country with no economy.
Yeah.
This is a country in rubble. There's no water most of the time. In Damascus, the capital, let alone the rest of Syria. There's no food getting in for a lot of people. They still need humanitarian aid. And you're telling him, go and open a suicidal war front with a country that is being backed by world superpowers, with the most advanced military technology. Who in their right mind would do that? Yeah. And to call him an Israeli agent just because he hasn't opened that war front yet, it took Hamas 16 years to even build the capacities to start challenging Israel. Hamas, the people currently fighting them, right? 16 years. People look at October 7th and they think Hamas sprung out of nowhere, What is this like? I assure you, by the way, all you have to do is look at Ahmed al-Shara's speeches. All you have to do is look at his inner circle. Look at HTS and their members. These guys are ideologically motivated people. They really are. These are the people who survived a 14-year brutal conflict, not just with outside powers, but within the own like Syrian revolutionary circles, right? They fought other groups. They fought ISIS. They fought Al-Qaeda even. They did. You know, past the splinter. They fought other groups, and nobody does that for 14 years with nothing if they're not motivated by something greater, right? And I believe that there is ideological motivation behind every single one of those men. Are they pragmatic? Yes, they've understood that they have to be pragmatic. Otherwise, there's not much that they can gain just by having a gun in your hand. It's easy to fight, it's harder to govern. You know, this is a saying that goes all the time. It's easy, it's harder to govern. Because governing, like, you have millions of people's fate in your hands.
Right.
And it's a very complex process. So, no, they're not Israeli agents. They're dealing with a very difficult situation of trying to rehabilitate their country. And for the first time in 100 years, in my opinion, for the first time in 100 years, through this, the Muslim world saw a glimmer of hope. I'm dead serious. I'm not trying to exaggerate here. They saw that, we might become powerful again. That we don't have to be washed out of our values to govern ourselves. You know? We can govern ourselves by being ourselves. And we can have agency. This, like Morsi in Egypt, the Islamic Party in Algeria, all these things, democratically won elections stomped out. Why? Because Israel, and at one point the West, I think the West's interests definitely have shifted, as we mentioned earlier, but Israel specifically, they fear a united, powerful Muslim world. They do. Netanyahu has said it himself. He said, we will not allow the establishment of a caliphate on the Mediterranean coast. We know what's keeping that guy up at night. You know?
It's not the
he's saying it.
Issues that he has.
Yeah, he's saying it. He's telling you, I don't want a caliphate on the Mediterranean coast. He knows something is brewing. To the people who say Ahmed al-Shara is a Zionist agent, I say, why would Israel be bombing the living hell out of the government in Syria if they were aligned with them? If these were agents, why would Israel be destabilizing their efforts to rebuild the country? If they're already going to give them everything they want, they could give it to them politically. Ahmed al-Shara could have normalized with Israel, right? There was already talks about him in the Abraham Accords. They could have allowed them to build that David corridor running through the south of the country to connect with the Kurds. They could have given the Kurds independence, for all we know. But clearly, that's not the intention of the government in Damascus. Clearly, Israel, something is keeping them up at night about these people. They saw these people come to power, and the first thing they did is start bombing them, right? That's not what you do with an ally. That's what you do with someone who scares you. And to this day, Israel is scared because these ideologically motivated Islamic fighters are now at your border, right? And the reason Israel is behaving the way they do is because if we give these guys time, they might very well become a real challenge to us. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a military challenge, by the way. It can be an economic powerhouse. It can be a new center of
gravity. I think specifically also the political model.
Right.
Because I think Israel has always recognized that the people in the region do not have zero tolerance for it. They hate everything about Israel as a the values of its government, the values of its the oppression of the Palestinians. The people of the region stand very strongly with the Palestinians, and I think Israel has always been terrified of those people kind of mobilizing against them. And I think that the model in Syria, which is a model of a government that is more accountable to its people, a government that is essentially a coalition of the interests of the people in that country. I think if that model were to be, for example, exported to Egypt, and I think Sisi is shaking in his boots right now.
Abdullah is shaking in his boots in Jordan.
Oh yeah, King,
Saudi in general.
It's just this. I mean, you're right.
And I think that is a concern in particular for Israel. And I think that you never really had a situation where the region has unified in any kind of meaningful way against Israel. And I think that if that were to happen, I think that I mean, I don't want you don't want to speculate militarily, but I think that their whole political approach since 48 basically has been divide and conquer, try to
controlled
peel
chaos,
off Egypt,
right.
try to peel off Jordan, try to install like dictators or friendly dictators in the region, and if you can't do that, then just create chaos basically, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why Syria scares them so much.
I'm going to add a layer to this, and I think Israel knows that it's becoming irrelevant. I think Israel has understood that its clock is ticking in terms of what vested interest the Americans and the West have in it. I mean, what was Israel useful for so far? Like intelligence sharing, kind of being like the policeman in the region and keep, destabilizing these Arab countries for the bidding of the West. I think the West is kind of taking an approach of stability and cultivating regional partners now. They see that these guys actually might be an asset rather than a challenge if we integrate them, right? And I think at that point, Israel just loses its relevance. So if Israel understands that, then they're going to do whatever it takes to stay relevant in the region.
Right. Well, and have you seen polling? Have you seen the polling of Americans, particularly younger Americans, from between 2022 to 2020 to recently, of like their opinion of Israel has shifted dramatically. I mean, we're watching a genocide in front of our eyes, one of the most horrific events in human history. We're
televised.
That's the thing. It's televised on social media. We're seeing images, some of the most horrific images. You can imagine that Israel will never come back from this as a political entity. This is an event for them politically that I think is a death blow essentially in the long run. I think people. I think that they are rapidly losing Western support. I think they were already losing Western support even before, and I think that they are rapidly losing Western support. I think, for example, in 2028 in the Democratic primaries, for the election, I think that's going to be one of the key issues. Do you support Israel? Do you not support Israel? I mean, it kind of was in the New York mayoral election.
It's going to grow. It's going to grow. There's going to be candidates in 2026.
They're feeding into it though because of their pushing of anti-Semitism laws that clearly are not.
Well, they're backfiring.
It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. So it's making the general populace that are not informed on this topic informed on the one topic, which is, y'all are passing bills that limit my free speech as an American. And Americans do not like that, by the way. No. We are some of the most diehard advocates of freedom of speech. And I will say, I mean, I lived in Alabama. I can tell you that with confidence that if somebody feels some type of way, and certainly down south, and they're not necessarily as educated, they will tell you so, okay? Not necessarily in a mean way, but they'll let their opinions be known, right? And that's essentially the soul of Americans. I mean, they rose up against the British Empire. I mean, very successfully so, right? So I think that's just not, as an American, that's not how we roll. So now to then have quite literally foreign agents telling you as an American citizen and you as an American citizen and me how to live, how to speak.
Preposterous.
Nope. No, sir. You threaten my First Amendment, I got the Second Amendment, right? That's literally the thought process of Americans.
Yeah.
That's not a stupid thought process. That's actually just a very minimalist type of mindset, actually. A very simpleton type of mindset that it's like an Occam's razor approach to life in a way, right?
Yeah.
So I think that Israel has quite literally destroyed its reputation on the international stage. It's interesting, though, we say this, their stock market in Tel Aviv has went up 174% since October 7th. So there's still a lot of funding that's going on.
Yeah,
but that's from Big Brother, America. I think now we start to see, in my lifetime, Tucker Carlson questioning the Israeli government.
On every public stage he can.
He literally getting Ted Cruz to make Israel look like the worst. He didn't even know how to defend Israel. He quoted a Bible verse that he didn't know which part of the Bible that it came from. To most people, whether they are educated or not, to most Americans, I'll say this, they saw that interview and they were like, why are we defending Israel again? They literally saw that one interview.
These guys spying on us?
Completely destroyed. I mean, given the whole 2-year PR mess that Israel has been going through, that was like the cherry on top for a lot of people, by the way, who were very clueless on the issue. Like, they were still watching Fox News thinking that Israel is our greatest ally. The maggots were saying, oh yeah, Trump is our guy, whatever he says, and because Trump is pro-Israel, then I'm pro-Israel. Even those people are turning on him. Because, I'm not going to talk about the Jeffrey Epstein thing, but that whole thing is somehow interconnected. But, I don't know, subhanAllah, like I never thought that this would happen in my lifetime, that so many people would essentially start to educate themselves on this topic.
I agree. And I think there's a shift, a cataclysmic shift for Israel. It's cataclysmic for them. Like, they truly will not be able to recover from this.
Well, and I think these are what we're witnessing is kind of the final. I don't want to say final, but it's a state acting out of desperation.
Yeah, it's like a bear. It's like a cornered bear.
Yeah,
right? They're showing their fangs and they're going to try to fight their way out, but they're being cornered ultimately. Like Trump's trip to the Middle East, in Riyadh, in Qatar, and in the UAE, even put more emphasis on this. That hey, we're pivoting to these guys now. Like we're gonna because they have the money ultimately too. Like the Gulf area and the Muslim world does have a lot of human capital, and it has a lot of capital in general that is beneficial to Western resources and markets and whatnot.
Well, not only that, but I think the rest of the world has learned to play the Israeli game. The Israeli game of essentially pour tons of money in. Because one of the things that the Israelis learned a long time ago, actually, is that the United States, by and large, the average American doesn't really care that much about the rest of the world. They don't care that much about foreign policy. So it doesn't take that much money to basically control American foreign policy on a particular issue. And the Israelis learned that a long time ago. And so they, of course, America's, we hear this all the time, America's commitment to Israel has been ironclad for, basically since, I don't want to say since its independence, but certainly since like 67, I think it's safe to say. And I think that the rest of the world has learned to play that game of just essentially lobbying, pouring quite a bit of money into American politics.
Yeah, and American politicians is for sale.
American politicians are for sale. American politicians will do what it doesn't actually take that much money actually to buy them off. And I think that the Gulf states in particular have learned that lesson. And I think they, for better or for worse, I think the Turks have learned that lesson.
But there is something like Thomas Massey, Representative Thomas Massey said this. He said, Israel claims to be our greatest ally. And it's like, you don't see Australia or Great Britain pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into foreign policy lobbying. Like, if you have to try that hard to keep public opinion up on you, you may not actually be our greatest ally. Like, that's something that comes naturally. And I think we're at a point that the intersection of American-Israeli interests is starting to diverge. And
you could argue whether they've ever had
right. You could,
but definitely they're diverging.
Right. And I think now publicly they're diverging. Like we saw with whole Iran thing, for example. Trump was visibly upset. Yeah, he said Israel doesn't know what that like Israel and Iran. But it's really weird for an American president to mention Israel in that light. They don't know what the F they're doing. I'm very upset at Israel right now. There are coming reports out of Syria right now that Trump and his people are saying Israel is acting like a child who doesn't want to listen. And Netanyahu did not coordinate with us. We don't want him to keep destabilizing the region, So there's clearly like this like fork that's happening where American foreign policy interests in the Middle East are becoming drastically different from Israeli foreign policy interests.
There's that, and then there's the other point that we were talking about, that America is by and large withdrawing from the Middle East. So they're, if you're the United States, you're recognizing that the greater threat now is China and Russia. And in general, this shift has happened for a long time. It's going back to like this second Obama term. Really, there was a white paper I think put out by the U.S. military, basically saying that the military should shift. The military had been kind of built toward counterinsurgency, toward things, toward very focused on the Middle East, and that we need to shift to great power politics. Russia, China. I think the Ukraine in 2014, and then Ukraine in 2021. And so I think that now
22, I think,
or 2022, yes. Yeah. So now we're at a point where I think that the United States is trying to withdraw from the region and has recognized that we don't have interests, we don't have core interests in the region, and that any interests we do have, we can largely outsource to allies. And turns out Israel's not actually that great of an ally. They have a tendency to not do what you want. They also have a tendency to kind of anger the rest of the region, to put it mildly. And so it turns out that that's not a very great alliance, and so we would rather outsource our foreign policy to the Gulf states and to Turkey essentially.
Not that anyone is legitimizing those guys, by the way.
No,
I'm not a big fan of the Gulf.
They have their own problems, and but I think that it would be vastly preferable. I think if the United States would have shifted
to Israel. I mean, it's I agree. I think I don't know. I want to hear your take on this too.
Like what? Just like the overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Israeli is Israel losing its prominence in the American psyche, like the American psychology.
There was a huge. Actually, okay. I want to add like one little point onto this. I think the reason why Israel is losing its position in America is because the older, more religious fundamentalist people are dying off, like the boomer generation.
True, yeah.
Like, if I can say one thing with confidence, it's that majority of boomers are like staunch Israeli supporters.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, COVID really impacted those individuals very, very badly, right? So maybe that also has to play in with the percentage shift.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, the largest percentage shift happened amongst...
Was in younger generations.
Was actually amongst older Democrats.
Really?
Because younger Democrats...
are already pretty aligned.
Were already kind of, and so there wasn't that much room.
Gen Z, right.
The largest shift was amongst older Democrats. And I actually do think...
And younger Republicans.
And younger Republicans, yeah, that's right.
But that's because of Christian nationalism. I wanted to speak
think
to
partly,
I feel like the evangelicalism, just like Christian nationalism in the past, it was weaponized in favor of Israel, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And we see that right now with literally hardcore, staunch evangelical individuals still supporting Israel. And I think it's because in their mind, we kind of talked about this a little bit, they want to literally start Yom Kippur.
It's a messianic.
They want to start Armageddon, okay? Yeah. As we know, if human man wishes to do something, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a greater plan.
You can't engineer.
You literally cannot engineer the coming of the Dajjal, or you can, obviously, again, we talked about this in our AI video about tools of the Dajjal, but regardless, I think that people are trying to summon something to happen. It's really not going to come as much as they want or as they hope. So with this kind of loss of this mindset and with this population shift in America, that's why I think that we're seeing this lack of Israel support. And additionally, America, people forget this, but America, the saying is America's a melting pot. Right? It's not like everybody's just going to have the same old views as the years continue onward. We are now seeing that happening. We have a lot more Latinos. We have a lot more black people. The white population, they say it's shrinking, okay, but by a little bit, right? So we have these huge population growths. We're all kind of molding together, and I think again, as a Muslim, Islam is growing in America, and that itself is leading to a lot of people to have ideology.
I work in politics. Muslims are organizing better. I know there's a lot of jadedness within the Muslim community, we suck, we're 100 years behind. We're really not. By the way, it doesn't really take too much to catch up. Genuinely, are we behind? Yes, we are. We haven't learned their methods and their tricks yet necessarily. But things are kind of starting to change. We're catching up. We're organizing better. We're integrating better into the political system.
To give a lot of credit, I would give a lot of credit to the Palestinian Americans themselves.
1,000%.
It reminds me actually of the Irish Americans. So Ireland, of course, experienced the Irish potato famine. And
it's manufactured, by the way.
The British, and so millions and millions of Irish ended up having to flee Ireland, and many of them went to the United States. And so you had a huge Irish diaspora in the United States. And so by the 1920s or 30s, when the Irish were actively fighting for their independence, you had a massive, massive Irish diaspora in the United States that was basically lobbying on behalf of their brothers and sisters in Ireland, in their homeland, were basically saying, no, we don't want to support this British government's oppression of our people. Exactly. And it was a big part of the Irish struggle, and I think you're kind of seeing that today with the Palestinian Americans. And it's the irony, of course, is that the Israelis sowed the seeds of their own destruction when they. When you expel people, they tend to go places and they tend to become kind of a thorn in your side.
And I think exile. I think the They
And
underestimated.
actually, Assad did the same thing when he expelled all these Syrians,
Right.
who then came back with the skills and that they had learned, and so
Education
it's,
from free countries essentially.
Subhanallah, I mean, it reminds you of Pharaoh's
Expulsion of Bani
expulsion of
Israel.
Subhanallah.
the dictators, they kind of sow the seeds of their own destruction.
Yes.
Pharaoh, the only person,
yeah.
Musa, the only person that he the only person that he allowed to live was Musa alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam ended up.
He wanted to slaughter all the male kids.
Yeah.
And the one kid,
Yeah.
was raised by him. You know,
And so it's just interesting that they have a tendency to kind of.
And I think they underestimated that Palestine is like they underestimated the Ummah mindset. You know, they underestimated the fact that Palestine is not just Palestinians. I'm gonna say this. I'm like I don't care what people think. Palestine is not just Palestinians. I have as much of a right to the cause as a Palestinian does. I have as much of a right to the cause of Syria as a Syrian does, right? Because for me, my faith goes beyond national borders. You know, I am Muslim first and foremost.
Nationalism is haram in my opinion.
It's an idol. We've talked about this. Nationalism is an idol. You know, and the ummah, the root word of it is which means mother.
I think it depends on what you mean. I object a little bit because I do think that people have a natural tendency to want to work together with the people in their local area, and I don't think that's
called asabiyya, which is Ibn Khaldun's definition of like the tribal mindset. There's Ernest Younger, right? You know Ernest Younger, the German philosopher, during World War II. German philosopher, kind of after World War II. Okay. He wrote about this concept of the motherland and the fatherland, right? And I like the way that he described it because I think it describes the Muslim world very well and how a Muslim should think. He said, the motherland is where you're born, where your traditions are, you know, not necessarily even where you're born, but like your background, you know, like your tradition, your belonging. It's like the womb of a mother, he says, or like the arms of a mother. You feel very comfortable in it, right? You feel very warm in it. He said the fatherland is your ideological umbrella. It's this thing that you collectively strive for. This is what, it's not wrong for you to be proud that you're Syrian. It's not wrong for me to be proud to be Albanian, right? It is wrong for me, I believe, to prioritize that above my deen.
Exactly.
Oh, for sure, absolutely.
You know,
I think the one thing that I would say is that oftentimes you get people, for example, people who view Syria, that haven't been paying attention to Syria, and then they sort of say they want to use Syria immediately as a tool for the Ummah when they haven't been following the issue, and then they basically say Syria needs to go and liberate Palestine. And I think that there's that mentality that you kind of get from people, and that's kind of where I would push back a little bit on what you're saying, which is that if you haven't been following a region or an issue that closely, and you sort of come in and don't impose the mindset that you've gotten maybe from other political conflicts or other things that and I think you do sometimes see that.
Salahuddin Ayyubi did not immediately chase after Al-Quds when he came into power. He unified the Muslim Ummah, and he kind of focused on the inner problems before he sought to challenge any external threats, right? He challenged the internal threats before he challenged the external threats. And I think that people really need to go and pump the brakes a little bit on, again, President Ahmed Shara, because he just came into power.
Right.
He wants, by the way, he has said, I want to run an election, okay? Y'all haven't even given him the opportunity to, be voted in, and you guys are expecting him to rule the entire world, to establish, essentially an Islamic Khalifa in the span of, a couple of months. Islam itself, did the Rasul spread Islam in a day?
No.
It took 14 years before he took his message publicly, or 12 to 14 years before he went publicly with Islam, right?
Medina,
So we should look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ as an example, as we should, by the way, and say to ourselves, okay, if the Prophet, who is Habibullah, took patience through the process, we are just humans. We got to be just as patient, right? And I know that there's a lot of hope. I know that there's what's happening in Palestine. It's a rallying call, if you want my honest opinion. But you have to do it strategically. Does suddenly, because you are witnessing the bloodshed that's occurring in either Palestine or China or Syria, does that mean that me as an individual, I should go and run and join ISIS like a lot of these individuals did? No, not at all. That pushes people towards, again, the wrong aspects of Islam. How can you help your Muslim brother? I don't know, like you said, economically, right? Challenge people economically. Be a good community leader, right? And by the way, I'm not just talking about for your Muslim community. I'm talking about the community that you live in.
Yeah.
You know, we live in America. We are granted a lot of opportunities and a lot of freedoms that our Muslim brothers and sisters that are being slaughtered are not offered, right?
Use it.
Doing the podcast itself, in my opinion, it's a way to challenge the norm, right? Because now you're getting your thought process out there, you're challenging the system, and you're actually inserting the haqq, right, into a system that is pretty corrupted and is pretty unjust and untruthful to begin with.
Well, and I've talked about this with people quite a bit, especially when you see kind of the way that the United States, our government, in the United States supports Israel in what they're doing right now. And I've said, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask us about that. It's going to ask the American people in general, but he's going to ask, those of us who live in the United States and benefit from the system. He's going to ask us, like, what did you do? What did you do about this? What did you do to stop this? Your own government, the people who represent you, whether you vote for them or not, right? They still represent you. They take your tax dollars. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask us about that. And we have an obligation to do whatever we can to change the policies of our government, to do what we have to raise the awareness in this country.
Yes.
We have that obligation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask us. And I'm ashamed of myself because I think that there's always more that you can do. There's always more that we can do, and that's one of the things that I think keeps me up at night, to be honest, is
being judged for that, essentially.
Yeah.
But I think Allah understands people's limitations and capacities. So no soul will be burdened with more than it can bear. So
right, but it's always a question of am I
can
doing,
you bear more?
Am I doing as much? I don't think. For me, at least, I know that I should be doing more.
I think we all should. I think we all have it within us to be doing more. But there's a way to do it where you start small and consistent. So I think whether it comes to Palestine or Syria, we are seeing, in my opinion, a resurgence of the night is always darkest right before dawn, right? And I think to myself a lot of times, imagine how the Muslims who lived in the time of the fall of the Ottomans felt. And if Islam was not defeated then, it's not going to be defeated now. It's just simply not. I think we actually bottomed out. I think we're on the way up. And all of these unfoldings, whether it's Palestine or Syria, are a sign of that, in my opinion. That they are trying their last-ditch effort to keep us down. And they will not succeed, in my opinion, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Sure. You want to wrap us up?
Well, I mean, there's a lot, to continue to be said. This conversation could take forever, but we continue to pray for the people of Palestine, for the people of Syria, for the entirety of the Muslim Ummah, and for the moral and conscience of mankind in general, right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just grant ease to the oppressed everywhere that they are. Today we discussed the geopolitical situation in Syria, the history of the revolution, and key figures like Ahmed al-Shara, and the geopolitics of the Western interaction with the Syrian government. And it's a very complex conversation, but it's a call to people to have an objective perspective on these issues. Stay up to date with them. And as Abdullah said earlier, don't impose your limited view on complex situations. Have the humility to sometimes just say, I don't know. So that's, I think, the lesson that I take out of this today, that sometimes we just have to say, this is beyond me. I don't know. And I have to learn more about it. And until next time, inshallah, Abdullah, thank you for being with us.
Thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed it.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.